Welcome, everyone. We're excited to host this webinar with Joshua White, and I also have my colleague, Asia. I'm David Gumpel. I'm Director of Operations at Fluence, and we're going to be hosting a discussion on how to support clients who choose psychedelics, and really through this lens of learning more about Fireside Project, which has a few different ways that they're supporting the psychedelic community. So we're going to have some time to learn about Fireside and talk about their offerings, and talk about harm reduction. So excited to be here and welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Honored to be here and honored to be here as well with a Fluence employee and Fireside volunteer.
So I imagine we could do some little introductions, but I also just wanted to share that harm reduction based interventions have a special place in my heart, and really the inception of Fluence, and really has been a big part of our vision and mission for the training that we're providing. Really got me involved in the field was originally learning about harm reduction psychotherapy for substance misuse. So just also excited to be here. And yeah, why don't we start off with just introducing you, Josh? I'm not sure if everyone in our community knows you.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Joshua White. I'm the founder and executive director of Fireside Project, which we'll talk more about. Psychedelics are my second career. I spent close to 20 years as a practicing lawyer, mostly working for the city and county of San Francisco as a deputy city attorney doing impact litigation. But I've had an interest in psychedelics for about 25 years. And for me, it was always the synergy of psychedelics and therapy that was so powerful for me. And actually, the kind of knowledge base for starting Fireside came because I was interested in leaving my career as a lawyer to become a therapist with the hope of eventually becoming a psychedelic therapist. And so, as part of the navigation of that potential career transition, I started volunteering on a hotline in San Francisco for parents with young kids. And I did that for about 7 years. And then at the start of the pandemic, when it seemed like the world was going to hell and the psychedelic field was exploding side by side, I thought that I would combine two of my great loves, psychedelic support and hotlines into one. And Fireside was the kind of the birth of that. I should also add that I spent many years volunteering for the Zendo project at festivals like Burning Man. So I kind of really saw firsthand how powerful psychedelic support can be. And then I'm just a deep believer um, of the significance of being able to talk anonymously with someone about psychedelic experiences, whether you're in the midst of one or wanting to process one after. I think there's so much richness and texture and freedom and security that comes with being able to speak anonymously to someone who you know has had their own powerful psychedelic experiences.
You. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. I go by Joshua, by the way.
Joshua, yeah. Asia, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Asia Molinat, and I am Special Projects Manager with Fluence. I've been with Fluence for about 3 years, and I've also been a Fireside volunteer for the hotline for also, I think about 3 years almost now. Yeah. And I it was really important to me to um, join Fireside because I wanted to participate in making the psychedelic space safer for people of color, um, and just creating a space where people who aren't usually portrayed as using psychedelics, um, so they can have a safe space to receive support as well. And uh, that's really important to me, and that's also partly the reason why I got involved with Fluence, About 3 years ago, I was initially brought in to help oversee scholarships for our diversity fund. And that kind of led to other things. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And yeah, I look forward to the conversations that will take place.
Welcome, Asia. So Joshua, it sounds like your initial foray into the field was uh, through the crisis hotlines and really seeing a need for a more specific focus on psychedelics.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was the combo of hotlines, and then I also had a fascination with psychedelic research. I started a group called Psychedelic Passage that presented different peer-reviewed research articles in San Francisco library branches, and so I'm equally as fascinated by the science as well as um, the just the art of being present with people as they prepare for and journey and integrate psychedelic experiences.
So just hearing that word crisis, yeah, I'm curious how much of this was like originally about dealing with difficult situations and how much of it is more for well-being, like even in this initial vision of it.
Yeah, so I actually don't identify as a harm reductionist, and
Yeah.
frankly, I'm not a big fan of the term. I don't know that people are excited about the possibility of interacting with a harm reduction resource. I think my sense is that like when people are in the midst of a challenging experience, they just want a safe and non-judgmental space. And so, at Fireside, I think like, really the vision is that like when someone reaches out to us, we create a safe and non-judgmental space for them to be able to have their experience. And there are numerous consequences or byproducts of that safe and non-judgmental space. One of them is, of course, that the risks may go down. When you hear someone tell you that, like, or remind you that like this is a medicine experience you're having and it'll be over um, soon, even though it may not feel like soon, that can really reduce risks. But also, another product of that non-judgmental space is healing and transformation and connection and community and so forth. And so I don't really see harm reduction as the goal. I see the goal as if I had to distill it to one word, it would be witness. How can we cultivate the art of being radically, fully with someone in a non-judgmental way? How can we create a space where all emotions, all experiences, all thoughts are deeply okay? And I think part of how we can do that is because of the fact that like we are peers, meaning that callers know that the person that they're speaking to has had what we like to say in the interview process as like tectonic psychedelic experiences, ones where your sense of reality, your sense of self, your perception of the world have all been really shaken to their core. And by having had those experiences ourselves, even if we're not talking about those experiences, I think it creates a sense of safety. It creates a liberation from the fear of non-judgment to talk to us about those types of things. I think, I have a therapist who I've been speaking to for many, many years, and there's sometimes like some holding back that happens when I'm going to talk about like some of the profoundly weird experiences that can happen on psychedelics, traveling back through time, becoming non-human forms, dissolving into white light, becoming a wolf. Um, and those things, I think you can talk to a peer about without fear of judgment. And I think that safe space really is, I think, essential for deep healing and transformational experiences.
That makes a lot of sense. So, in a sense, expanding on this term of just reducing harm, but as you put it, really as offering this service of witnessing and holding space, and that really being the primary focus of supporting psychedelic experiences, whether they be a client or, but you're saying there's something special about it being in a peer or in a community setting, especially when, there can be these really big shifts in their beliefs, and having that stability and safety around not feeling judged with what they're going to share can be really supportive of their well-being moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that when we're talking about clinical support and non-clinical support, whether it's like peer support or coaching or chaplaincy, of course, the foundation is creating a safe, non-judgmental space where all emotions are okay. Um, and I think so many calls on the support line, so many coaching sessions that we provide at Fireside, which I know we'll talk about, they may look similar to therapy in a lot of ways, because of course their active listening is a foundational part of therapy. But I think that in a peer context and in a coaching context, the support that is provided is non-hierarchical. And that there's a subtle but powerful difference in that. I know my relationship with my therapist is hierarchical, and that's good. I think that it's really helped me heal. And I think it's very, very different to interact with someone with whom you're in a hierarchical relationship, especially on psychedelics. I think it's a real question about whether you want to be in that hierarchical connection with someone in the midst of a psychedelic experience. Um, because I think like with therapy, the therapist is coming to you via their license. They're a therapist. Their training is starts with the DSM. Of course, it goes so far beyond that. But I think a lot of features of the psychedelic experience are symptoms of a variety of DSM disorders. And so much about of psychedelics as well is about transformation. It's not just curing us from particular disorders. And so I actually think that there are ways that peer support and coaching are better suited for psychedelic experiences than therapy.
Yeah, I hear you. Um,
If I could just
yeah,
briefly
go for
add
it.
to that, I do feel like um, another benefit of coming at this from the peer perspective is not having to feel any pressure to fix whatever situation is going on for the person who's, you know, experienced a really bad trip or is having trouble integrating what happened. And by not having to have that pressure on you, you can engage in a really deep listening. And sometimes that's all the person needs is someone to deeply listen to their story and what they make of it. And that can be really powerful and really emotional. So,
Oh, I love that. And it for me, can I expand on what
of
Asia
course.
said? Yeah, I thank you for raising that and I love it. And I think there's all this talk in the psychedelic field about healing intelligence, which is a term I don't like in the least. But I do think that in numerous um sort of psychological models like Jungian, Freudian, and so forth, there is this notion of an inbuilt propensity to self-realization. And the practice, as Asia said, of being radically with and um, and not having this desire to fix actually empowers our callers or our coaching clients to connect to that inbuilt propensity towards self-realization. And I actually think that adopting for a therapist to adopt like a cognitive behavioral approach, especially in the midst of a psychedelic experience, could actually be harmful.
And I would agree that this client-centered, non-judgmental approach, has not been part of traditional training, licensure training. I was
Hmm.
lucky enough to go to the new school where they had a harm reduction based program, where we got to learn, read Andrew Tatarsky and Marlet's work on harm reduction psychotherapy as part of the program, and I got to offer harm reduction interventions to the kids in the dorms that got in trouble with alcohol use. But and many programs, it's not part of the traditional training to work through this lens and also understand how perhaps these community supports or peer supports can be supportive through, you know, or can be supportive of psychedelic experiences. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, there's like an unfortunate sort of hierarchy that seems to exist in certain quarters of the psychedelic field with clinical support at the top and then these other forms of support kind of below it. And I just absolutely reject that. It's a ridiculous way to look at different forms of support. I think really of um, this bigger question of what does the like continuum of care look like? What does community support look like? How do we help people reach the healing and transformational potential of psychedelics? And I think there are multiple forms of support that can be helpful to people. Therapy is great for some people some of the time and out of reach for many people, or worse a lot of the time. And I think there are other forms of support, peer support, coaching, chaplaincy, religious forms of support, as well that have an equal role to play.
yeah. I mean, just continuing on the education part, even you know, in the original programs that we offered, Premise and Promise was really just making this training accessible. So,
Hmm.
how to provide clinicians with this information of, how can I actually help a client within my scope? And then, what are other ways that I can help them support their own integration process with their
Hmm.
social support and um, just have a really good understanding of what's happening, what this experience is like, and
Hmm.
and then often, I imagine they have not volunteered at Zendo and, just don't have a lot of opportunities to really even experience all the conversations that like Asia's had working the hotline and hearing about. It's just not something you get a lot of experience working with.
Yeah, and I mean, I know there's this like discussion around, like should clinicians have their own psychedelic experiences? Should they talk about them? Whatever. But if a clinician is going to be supporting, I mean, I have my views on that, but what seems to me inarguable is that if a clinician is going to be supporting people with psychedelic experiences, they should be deeply familiar with what those experiences look like and how they can manifest and how long they can last. And by that, I don't just mean the journey itself, but the integration process. Because I think part of how psychedelics often work is by actively destabilizing people, right? That like so many pattern-based disorders, depression, anxiety, are a result of someone being in a rut, a pattern, a way of thinking and being and doing. And psychedelics disrupt those patterns and then create this opportunity to form new patterns. And so for anyone supporting someone on psychedelics during or after, the awareness that like psychedelics don't work like aspirin works on a headache, where you take it and it disappears, but there is this process of sometimes breaking open and breaking down, and the magic is in the process of reconstituting. But I think that there's a real risk if that process of kind of having to like reformulate a worldview and reformulate a way of being is pathologized or seen as a risk in and of itself. I mean, of course, there can be risks, but those risks I think can generally be mitigated with like active support rather than like pathologizing that process.
And I think that's also where a lot of people have fears of being pathologized. We do have people call in who have therapists who they see on a regular basis, and they don't feel comfortable talking about their psychedelic experiences with their therapist because um, for they might be scared of legal repercussions. They might be scared of what their therapist thinks of them. So yeah, I think it's definitely important for anyone who's working with someone who uses psychedelics to be familiar with what kind of experiences people can have.
Oh, that's such a great point. And like just to add one little thing to that is if a client, it's one thing for a client to know that their therapist isn't supportive of psychedelics. That's probably f fairly rare. But oftentimes our callers will say that they don't know whether their therapist would be receptive to psychedelics. And it's the not knowing that can actually keep someone from speaking to their therapist about their experience.
I actually, yeah, even through legal avenues, I've had participants at the retreat that I've led that at the end of the retreat, they said they didn't tell their therapist that they were doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy, which was interesting because they were anxious about the judgment and stigma, even of something that is legally accessible, although off label. Even before the call, Asia and I were just connecting about the stigma of our growing up with the dare generation and like even the idea that substance use or psychedelics could be beneficial or adaptive in some way has only really come around in the last few years. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean another wrinkle to that is, like a client may fear simply that their therapist may write in the client's notes that the client took psychedelics, and that could be um, deeply harmful to the client in ways that the therapist doesn't anticipate. I was actually talking to a therapist the other day who said that when clients tell her about psychedelic experiences, what she writes in the chart is journey rather than that they had like so the client went on a retreat or the client went on a journey and doesn't write psychedelics. So I think there are like sort of obvious ways that a therapist could be harmful to a client, saying the wrong thing, as Asia said, pathologizing aspects of the experience. But then there are less obvious ways, like inadvertently making a note in the chart that could be, seen by a family court, or could be obtained through other means that could come back to harm the client. And those harms, of course, could be far greater for people from marginalized communities.
Speaking of people from marginalized communities, I think another um, demographic that um, these kinds of supports really benefit are people from rural communities.
Mm,
So we'll have callers who live in a very isolated area where everyone around them is super conservative and they don't have friends or family that they can share these experiences with. Um, and it can be really hard for them in those cases to find any kind of support nearby.
hmm hmm And often in rural communities, there is less likely to be psychedelic community, and there's less likely to be psychedelic friendly therapists.
yeah, I can say at least from the training perspective, because we do offer our programs online, we do have
Hmm
clinicians that are looking for community that in their local community might be much more conservative or there just aren't other clinicians practicing and even from that perspective, from a collaborative care perspective, trying to find that community that doesn't really exist in a lot of these rural areas is even a challenge for providers as well, which I imagine also, makes it harder for clients as well. So
Yeah, yeah.
so it sounds like there's some pitfalls around creating safety, but I'm just curious, like what like our community could learn from this perspective of witnessing in their training. I think there's a lot of motivation, at least from the participants in our programs and our trainees, to do no harm, to really be supportive. They're lifelong learners, and like their clients' well-being is really, why they're investing all this time and energy to learn something new and provide this service. So yeah, just curious, any wisdom you would share there.
Yeah. I mean, I would say a few things, and first, I mean, I think like this, I think what we're going to share applies whether or not you're a therapist working in a clinical trial or or a ketamine clinic. But it just applies if you're a clinician out there in the world, right? If you're a nurse working at a hospital, if you're a therapist with a private practice, there are going to be people talking to you about their psychedelic experiences. And there are opportunities to be supportive and opportunities to be harmful. I think like, for me, the first thing is, well, one, it's really important to take courses like at Fluence, right? Have knowledge, have basic knowledge of, how psychedelics work, how long they can last, um, you know, what the realistic risks may be and how those risks can be mitigated. So there's like a real knowledge piece there. I think like responding to a client with like war on drugs propaganda would be, traumatic for a client. But even things like saying to a client, well, you had a mushroom experience, but there actually hasn't been a clinical trial on mushrooms that's been completed yet. So the evidence is still out whether it's actually healing for you. I mean, that may be technically true, but I venture that that would be the absolute wrong thing to say to someone who is like integrating an experience that they've already had. So I think that piece of knowledge, that level of knowledge is really important. As we were saying a moment ago, like really understanding the trajectory of I guess the myriad trajectories that psychedelic experiences can actually take will be really important. So you can have an understanding of like where is this person in the process and 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 is what they're experiencing like quote unquote normal for where they are in the process. And one of, as Asia can speak to, like normalization is one of the kind of like tools that we use on the line because often when people are reaching out, they want to know like is what's happening to me like normal for someone who has, say, like taken 2 hits of acid and is 5 hours in? Is it normal that I feel like I'm dying? Is it normal that like I came back to my life and it feels like it doesn't fit, like I left my clothes in the dryer for too long? So being able to like normalize their experience, I think is powerful. I think having the awareness that multiple forms of support are really could really be helpful is good. So clinicians like affirmatively providing Fireside's number as needed and really emphasizing that this is not a crisis service only. This is just a place where you can talk to someone who's had their own experiences, as well as other resources like Global Psychedelic Society, which oversees or helps kind of incubate and pollinate local psychedelic societies. So understanding that like your clients could really benefit from community. And then the final point, just to echo what Asia said is really being the loving rock, knowing that what the person needs is not for you to fix them, but to simply, as Ram Dass said, like be there with the fullness, or he said loving rock, meaning to be there with like the fullness of your presence and your full and open, compassionate heart. Um, Asia, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Um, I mean, I'm just thinking back to so many of the phone calls that I've had where at the beginning I felt like, oh, I feel I'm not the right person to support this person. What they're going through is like so heavy and so intense. And I just tap into that energy of being with them in the present moment and deeply listening to what they're saying and reflecting back to them what they're saying. And the emotional release that you can hear over the phone when you do that, it's just um it's just amazing to witness it happening in real time and just realizing that being there is all you really need to do.
I love that. And there is this like leap of faith that someone takes in reaching out to Fireside, but it's also a leap of faith to talk to a clinician about psychedelic experiences. There's fear of judgment. There's fear that the clinician won't have the knowledge about it. There's fear that of how of clinical judgment, fear that this may wind up in your soap notes. And I think being aware that the client may feel like and is taking a risk, taking a leap of faith by talking to you, I think can inform how you show up for them.
Sounds simple enough, but I know that it can be hard not to hold that space and does take a lot of energy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, among the most beautiful experiences one human being can have is supporting someone who is navigating a psychedelic experience. To be to be in this like moment of potentially radical transformation and radical healing. Um, I think it's one of the most powerful parts of being alive.
Cool.
I think another one of the things that makes um, the experiences that people have so interesting is that it doesn't happen. The experiences don't unfold in a in a linear fashion. So sometimes people might call 2 weeks after they've had an experience, or even 6 months, or even longer. Um, I think I've heard someone call in who had an experience like 7 years prior that really stuck with them and was life changing. And even all that time later, they still hadn't fully processed everything that happened. Um, getting uh, the opportunity to hear people narrate their experience and create meaning out of it, it's just remarkable to be able to hear and to honor.
Mm, I love that.
It's nice to know that when people call, they might get you.
That's
Uh,
actually when we're interviewing people to work on the support line, people often ask like, what are the qualifications? And really what it comes down to is the question of if you were tripping or the person you love most in the world was tripping, would you want this person I'm interviewing to be on the other end? And like,
yeah.
Asia, hell yes.
So I know this is the talking about the hotline, which is like a unscheduled you call, but I know you're also moving into offering up coaching, and just curious to explain a little more. I'm more familiar with coaching because I actually came into the field originally through doing an International Coaching Federation accredited coaching program
Mhm.
before learning more about clinical psychology and being involved in research. But I'm not sure if everyone really knows what coaching's role is and how that ties in with the differences in the support line.
Yeah, great. I love that question. So, I think the genesis of our coaching program, I guess has a couple of roots. I mean, one is we're listening to our community. And one of the things that so often callers want is long-term ongoing support, right? It's nice to have a one-off conversation, but it's anonymous with volunteers and we can't guarantee that you're going to speak to the same, volunteer again. It's really not a long-term relationship. It's a one-off conversation. So that was one genesis of it, or one root of the genesis. Another is that Fireside is a nonprofit that's relied exclusively on philanthropy, and we really need to be able to generate revenue as a way of, becoming a financially self-sustaining organization. And then the third is that the psychedelic field needs more forms of rigorous and ethical support. And so, so that's those kind of strands wove together to birth our coaching program. So what
You
is
said
it?
ethical and what?
Ethical
Ethical
and
and
rigorous.
rigorous. Okay.
Yeah. So what is the program? If you go to our website, firesideproject.org/coaching, think of it as a telehealth platform. You go, you see the photos and bios of our coaches. You can pick the coach that's right for you based on what qualities are feeling alive for you, whether it's um, gender or race or areas of interest, which medicines they've tried. You can have a free 20-minute consultation to see what it feels like to be in conversation with that coach. And then you hire the coach and you keep meeting with them as long as you would like. So our coaching program begins, or we can start seeing you the moment you say yes to a journey. And so we will often spend weeks helping our clients prepare for journeys. We're not with them during the journey. They have to go elsewhere for it. And then integration can last, months and years. Our coaching program started, I think it's about 9 months now. I'm lucky enough to be one of the coaches, and there are clients who I've been seeing weekly or biweekly the entire time. And for me, that really speaks to the nuance and long-term quality of integration, right? You can have a powerful insight on psychedelics about wanting to change your career, wanting to make shifts in your relationships, but to really apply that to your life takes a lot of time. And the vision is that our coaches can be there every step of the way with you. Who are our coaches? They're people who, like Asia, started off as volunteers on the line. They spend a minimum of a full year on the line as volunteers, and then they go through a hiring process to become a coach. So that's another interview, that's conversations with their supervisors to get a sense of where they are in their skill development. Then there's an additional training. And then I think the most powerful piece, or a very powerful piece, is that our coaches have weekly supervision from a clinician. And that clinician is an extraordinary human being, Jacob Hom, who is a psychology professor at Mount Sinai and the director of their Center for Complex Trauma. If you've ever read the CPTSD memoir, What My Bones Know, the author sought treatment from Jacob. And so we're, as far as I know, the only coaching program that hires as employees, and then provides supervision to our coaches in an ongoing way. And so when I look at the coaching field, right? There are major problems with it, shall we say. There are no certification standards. There's no training standards. Anyone can call themselves a coach with little to no training. There's no accountability really, since most coaches are kind of one-off lone wolves, as you might say. Now, that's not to say that there aren't fantastic coaches, but if coaching is really going to be a systemic solution to the lack of psychedelic support options, there really need to be like standards. And so Fireside's program is really, I think, a huge step in that direction. Coaches are employees; they're supervised. If there are concerns about how they're doing their job, there's an organization where a complaint can be lodged. And so the hope is that this really like helps coaching be taken seriously as a modality. And to explore that, actually, we have a study that we're going to be starting with Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital, where MGH has a ketamine clinic for treatment-resistant depression, where as part of the clinical environment, there's no psychological support. Now, many of the patients may have therapists, but as Asia referenced, a lot of people may not be comfortable talking to their therapist for various reasons. And so the study will compare outcomes as between the current clients or current MGH patients, and then those who are MGH patients who get fireside coaching for 3 months as part of their ongoing ketamine experiences. So our vision is really to demonstrate that this form of non-clinical support can be rigorous and impactful and can be embedded within a clinical environment.
So it's really great to hear how important the ethical and rigorous level of training, because I would agree that coaching was a little bit of the Wild West, and but it does fill a need, and it seems to be a need, which is why they exist, and have obviously many of the challenges with psychedelic therapy happening in non-clinical contexts is that those practicing, there's no state licensing board, there's no um, you know required confidentiality. Um, there's just not a set ethical standard. So what I'm hearing is like because of the coaches are all employed, there's some way to hold some accountability for the standard of practice, at least within your organization, and kind of elevate this, especially through look actually doing some research.
Right. And not just that they're employed, but before we hire them, we got to spend at least a full year with them, providing the training, providing supervision every week, when they're working on the support line, and getting a sense of, is this the type of person who shows up on time? Where are they with their skill level? When they're given constructive feedback, do they continue to get better, and so forth? And um, so that's sort of I think I'm not aware of any other coaching program that does that really does that. That's not to say that there aren't good coaching programs. It's just that typically you'll go through a training, you'll get a certification, which, by the way, anyone can say that anything that they do is certified. And then the person is out there in the world, um, and realistically, like accountable to no one.
Yeah. So you had mentioned a little bit like their main focus was integration, and that could be short term or long term, and um, it sounds like there's, I guess, because they're not providing a diagnosis, like is there any level of assessment, like like what's happening actually in supervision, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, that's a great question. First, just to say it's preparation and integration. And I should just say that, the importance of rigorous preparation like cannot possibly be understated, right? If when a person really like dives deep into their intention beforehand, why am I doing this? Why now? What am I hoping to get out of this? How might my life look different? What are the obstacles I may encounter? How may I navigate them? What does my support system look like? The knowing to clean your house beforehand, right? All of these things, you don't want to be thinking about them in the immediate aftermath of your journey for the first time. So that's a powerful role that coaching can play. The second thing I should say is, to your question, David, like all clients fill out an intake form, and there are certain diagnoses that pl would place a client outside of the scope of our coaching program, like psychosis related disorders, et cetera. So there are people who we just don't coach. Um, and um, and I should just also issue the caveat, like this is not therapy, which isn't to say that people don't come to us with trauma, because of course people often take psychedelics to address trauma, but we're not providing psychotherapy. But that's not to say that there's not a huge role for the supervision process. And candidly, it looks like clinical supervision. And so, what do I mean by that, right? So often, clinical supervision is focused on transference and countertransference, right? What's coming up? What is the client projecting onto me, and what might I be projecting back onto them? Those concepts may have originated in a clinical context, but those are just facts of human relationships, right? When someone comes to you as the coach, they may perceive that you have all of the answers. You may remind them of their father, their mother. They may remind you of your child or your partner. Um, you must have a space to be able to cultivate awareness of those dynamics, and then to be able to use that awareness to like navigate how you're holding yourself and how you're showing up for those people. So often our weekly supervision really just starts with like, what's hard for you? What's going on for you with this client? And it can be, a whole range of things. Like, I was really hurt when my client said they wanted to reduce the frequency of their sessions, or I find this client very attractive. What am I supposed to do about that? Or, there's aspects of what the client is saying to me that are activating my own trauma. What do I do about that? And so that's what therapists do, I know, in clinical supervision. But the ability to cultivate that type of awareness in like a safe and facilitated space, I think is really essential for any form of psychedelic support, because of how amplifying psychedelics can be. I mean, of course, for facilitators as well, to know to be aware of their own shadow, and to cultivate awareness of what's being projected onto them.
Makes a lot of sense. Boundaries, having those boundaries and working with transference takes a lot of hours of practice
Oh, yeah.
as we continue. I can just keep finding more layers.
Yeah. It's beautiful, right? Like you're working on yourself.
Yep.
And as you polish your own mirror, then you can be um, show up more completely for your clients.
So we have like a couple more minutes before we can open up to Q&A. You know, I know we talked a little bit about talking about like where this line is, which we've explored a little, and from my view, it feels like something that's complementary versus supplemental, one or the other, and it's a little bit of where people are on the arc and the quality and the level of care that they need.
Oh
Like
yeah.
really a higher level of care, and so people, really just want to have these supportive conversations with people that can hold safe boundaries and hold safe space and really witness um, and at least for me, like that client autonomy of what they need is like most important. And I've definitely spoke through a coaching lens, had clients that didn't want to do coaching or therapy really. They just wanted to have
Mm.
some support afterwards, but they really had like the social supports, or they had a spouse or some sort of practice already that they felt supported them through their psychedelic experience. So I think it really does come back all to what does that client need, right? Like
Yeah.
how can we listen to that?
Yeah, and just to emphasize, I mean, the support line, and I do prefer to call it a support line rather than a hotline to communicate that a person doesn't have to be in an act like in a crisis to reach out to us. But nonetheless, it's in the moment support, right? And so there's a huge difference. And of course, with psychedelics, people may need in the moment support either during it or in a really like you're integrating and you have a thought or a challenge and you can reach out to someone. That's just so different from picking a coach or picking a therapist and then setting an appointment, in a week or 2 weeks. I mean, what do you do at midnight when your therapist is not available to you? That's a really powerful gap that the support line is filling.
Yeah. I imagine it's better than reading about cases on Reddit or Erwid, right? Which could also be helpful as well, but
Yeah. A lot of people tell us now that sometimes they'll reach out to ChatGPT, which can provide active listening support, but I don't think anything will ever replace human connection.
well, I can at least plug. We do have our upcoming training on psychedelic harm reduction and integration therapy. Um, if you haven't taken our essentials course, you can start in May, and then part two starts in September. Is there any dates that you'd like to promote, Joshua?
Um, I would say that we get a lot of questions about people who want to volunteer on the support line, and we do about 3 to 4 trainings per year. We just completed one, so we probably won't be doing another one until early summer. But we recommend that folks follow us on Instagram and also sign up for our newsletter, which they can do on our website, firesideproject.org. And that's how we notify folks about the trainings. And as I mentioned previously, there's no hard and fast qualifications to become a volunteer. Obviously, if you have experience providing support in other contexts, clinical or otherwise, that's helpful. But it doesn't matter how many letters you have after your name, you can still volunteer.
I recently had a uh, clinician tell me a good way to get experience is just go to a bar sober and have conversations with people.
Or a festival.
Yeah, or a festival. Yeah. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but if those listening would like to put anything in the Q&A, we'd be happy to answer it. Asia, do you have any burning desires for questions? Anything you want to share still?
I don't have any questions, but I did think about one of the other benefits of the support line are addressing immediate safety concerns,
Mm,
um, especially when people are undergoing their journey alone. There have been a couple instances that I know of where people weren't at home and wanted to go home, but were not in the state to be able to drive. And so that can be another um, gap for Fireside to fill in. So that person does, they don't want to call their therapist and they don't want to call the police either in most cases. So just having someone to provide support during those moments and escalating it if necessary is really important.
So
right.
as part of like preparation, I imagine they might have like tiers of a close friend they might talk to before, or a roommate if they were there, and then if those people aren't available, um, might be Fireside, something like that.
Yeah,
Well,
and that actually, oh, go ahead, Asia.
oh, when I was saying escalating, I was referring to like in the most extreme cases, if we did need to contact law enforcement, that was something that we would do.
Yeah, and if someone doesn't know, right? I mean, like, people may mistake like an ego death type experience with like an actual physical safety risk, and that's definitely something that, Fireside helps with, right? And it's actually like really easy to tell the difference, right? Usually when you're talking to someone who's sort of maybe on the verge of an ego death experience, like just by providing that compassionate listening, it allows the person to like start to relax and turn towards the experience, whereas like actual safety issues are usually like extremely easy to spot. Um, someone once called in with you know, their child had eaten a 12-gram bar of mushrooms, or um, blood coming out of their leg because they tripped. Like when it's not emotional support, that would be outside of our scope. Um, So I got another question. All right, there is a question here. Do you want me to answer it?
Sure.
So the question is, Joshua, curious where you see other applications of coaching model fitting into the emerging psychedelic paradigm. That's such a great question. Um, I think one area is retreats of all varieties. Um, I think whether it's an ayahuasca retreat, an ibogaine retreat, and so forth, I think having coaches on site can be really powerful. There can also be coaching that is provided before and after a retreat, often by the retreat company. I actually think that's the most responsible practice. Um, I also see a role for coaches, throughout clinical contexts. So, ketamine clinics, and even now, with the FDA's decision regarding MDMA, it seems like, and part of that seems to be the FDA not really knowing what to make of psychotherapy and obviously not regulating psychotherapy. And so I think more companies, including Compass, for instance, are moving away from psychotherapy and towards a psychological support model. It strikes me that coaches could provide psychological support that complies with like Compass's clinical trial model and others. So I really think I actually would sort of flip the question and kind of say that it's hard to think of circumstances where coaching wouldn't fit into the psychedelic paradigm or continuum of care. What
And
do you
also,
think, Asia? Oh yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just thinking, I can also imagine that people who participate in clinical trials and would like to continue seeing someone about their clinical trial experience. Sometimes there aren't a lot of resources available um, from that clinic. So if they can maybe outsource that to a coach, that could make things a lot more accessible uh, for that research participant, especially
Oh,
because
abs
those trials can be so short and abrupt.
yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's so tough because I know that for, clinical trials, and anything that the company provides has to be part of the FDA protocol, which is fine. It just adds complications. We've had conversations with different Fireside has had conversations with different drug development companies about, potentially including peer support in their models. Um, and and the challenge overall, right, is that, like eh, it's expensive to really provide like long-term care for people. And so many ketamine clinics, for instance, don't provide very much support, but that's just because they want to keep their costs down, which totally makes sense. And so I think like the big question really is, um, is there a way to have like a like robust care delivery that is also cost effective? I don't think the field really has an answer for that yet. And I think that like coaching and peer support have to be a really important part of that because of how cost effective they can be compared to therapy.
Yeah, that would answer a lot of the questions about access and in the field. Great. Well, I really appreciate, I know you're very busy, Joshua, and so appreciate you speaking to us, speaking to the community. And thank you, Asia, also for your time today. It's great to hear more about your role at Fireside. I hadn't heard a lot about that before. And yeah, this will be recorded, so it'll be posted on our site. And yeah,
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And Asia, it was great to chat with you and hear a little bit about your experience on the line. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for joining us and sharing so much of what else is going to take place within Fireside.